Well, thanks a lot for coming today to AgileCamp. I'm excited to talk to you today to share some advice from my book, The Lean Product Playbook, on how to build better backlogs and make sure you're building what customers want. Real quick, so you guys know where I'm coming from, I started out with a technical background. I was an electrical engineering major, been coding since I was 10. And after doing actually nuclear submarine design for 5 years, I realized I wanted to go get an MBA. And so I moved out here to Silicon Valley and went to business school at Stanford. And that's where I learned about this awesome career called product management. I said, that's what I want to do, because I knew I wanted to get involved with building software products. And I asked people, where's the best place to learn product management? And they said, Intuit. So I went to Intuit. I worked on the Quicken team and became a product leader at Intuit. After Intuit, I spent a lot of time at different startups as a product leader. Also started my own startup called Your Version, which was a personalized newsreader. And I stumbled into becoming a product consultant. And I've had clients like Box, Facebook, Microsoft, Medallia. I'm also passionate about sharing best practices. So almost 4 years ago, I started a monthly speaker group in Palo Alto. Now it's in Mountain View, called Lean Product, Lean UX, where we bring in the top speakers. And that's my Twitter handle, and that's my website where I post my slides and videos of my talks if you want to check it out. I'd love to learn more about your guys' background, so maybe we can just raise your hand, whichever applies to you. Who's a developer here in the audience? No developers. Okay. Who's a Scrum Master? All right. Who's a project manager? Okay. Who's, I didn't put on there. Who's a program manager? Hey, we got one. Cool. QA? All right. Product managers? Anybody? Oh, we got some. Awesome. Entrepreneurs? Other? Did I miss? What's the other? What do you guys do?
Business analyst.
Business analyst. BA. I almost put that on there. Yeah.
Enterprise coach.
Enterprise coach. All right. Great, guys. And then how about company size? Who's at a really small company, less than 20? Couple people. And who's up to 100? Right. Who's up to 500? 2,000? Who's at a big company bigger than 2,000? Okay. Awesome. And then who's more in B2B, enterprise software? And who's more in B2C? All right, cool. Great. So I just wanted nice to get a good mix. So we got a good mix of folks here. So obviously this is AgileCamp. And we all know Agile is a great thing. It's an incremental, iterative way to build software products. And I think for the most part, obviously there's laggards. But I think for the most part, people generally agree it's a good way to build software. And more companies are doing a better job at it. And it basically lets you build products more quickly, right, and better. But it doesn't necessarily tell you what to build. And so you can actually build the wrong product more quickly and better. So that's what my talk's about. Is like, great, assuming you've got some well-performing Agile development process, or even if you don't, how do you figure out what the heck we should put in the backlog that's going to create the most value, right? So it's kind of like decoupling those two. So Agile answers the question, how should we build a product? What process should we use? How should we work together? But it doesn't answer the question necessarily, what product should we build? And I like to take like a broader framework of all the activities that go into building a successful product. And the first one is basically, a discover phase where we try to figure out what is it, what are the pain points, what are the needs that are out there, a define phase, a design phase, and a develop phase. And the kind of questions we were answering, obviously in develop, that's where Agile comes in, where we're building it. But there's a lot of other things we need to, other questions we need to answer and get correct if we're going to build something that's going to create a lot of customer value. In the discover phase, we're getting clear on who's the customer and what are their needs. In the define phase, we figure out, okay, great, how are we going to meet those needs? How are we going to be better than the other products that are out there? And what is our feature set going to be, right? We're identifying the functionality. In the design phase, we're figuring out what's our user experience going to be. We're focused on things like usability and delight. And we're actually getting out of the building and testing with users to get feedback on it. And then finally, in develop, we're building it, right? So there's a lot that needs to happen before we build it to achieve product market fit. And so how should we decide what product to build? Having worked with so many products and so many product teams, basically I came up with a framework and a process for doing that. That's why I wrote the book, The Lean Product Playbook, that I'm going to be sharing advice from today. I'm actually happy to give away a copy to someone here. It's just a Twitter raffle, basically. If you just include my hashtag @DanOlsen. If you want to take a photo of a slide, that's great. You want to throw a hashtag on it, that's great too. So happy to give one away here. But it's basically a guide on how to achieve product market fit. Product market fit was actually coined by Mark Andreessen, the guy who invented Netscape back in the day. He was a big, famous venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz. So he coined the term in 2007 in a blog post entitled The Only Thing That Matters. And it sat in relative obscurity until the lean startup movement kind of made it much more popular. But the funny thing is, anytime you have a movement like Lean Startup, there's a lot of buzzwords that are out there, like MVP and pivot and product market fit. MVP is probably the one that people most have these violent debates about, either inside your company or on the internet. Right? I've seen people trolling each other on what is and isn't an MVP online, right? Product market fit, we'll avoid that today. Product market fit, they speak about a little differently. People talk about it almost simplistically, like it's this true or false state of existence. Oh, Box succeeded because they had product market fit. Startup X, sadly, they failed because they did not have product market fit. It's not really super helpful, and if you Google or look around, you won't find really much in-depth definition or any way to achieve it. So that's why I wrote the book. As I said, my background's in engineering, so if I want to accomplish something like product market fit, then I want to have a framework that I can refer to. So the framework that I created is the product market fit pyramid. I want to walk you through it real quick. It's a model with 5 layers. The bottom 2 layers are the market layers. And the idea is it's a pyramid because each layer builds on top of the others. But it all starts with the target customer. The foundation of the pyramid is whose life are we trying to make better? Whose pain points are we trying to address? Who are we trying to create value for? And if that changes, then everything above that could likely change, right? The next layer up is for that customer, what are their underserved needs, their unmet needs, their pain points, right? The customer benefits that they want us to address for them. And taken together, these are the market. And if you look at any marketing textbook or economics textbook, it'll tell you a market is a group of people that share a set of common needs. So that's the market. And you don't control the market. You can pick which market you want to go after, which market segment you want to go after, but you can't actually control it. Your product is where you have more control and where you make decisions. And by the way, this framework is just a way to kind of categorize the hypotheses that you're making as you develop your product and the ones that you need to get right to achieve product market fit. But your product hypotheses I like to categorize as these 3. Your value proposition, which is great, of the benefits, of the customer needs, which ones are we actually going to say our product delivers on, and how are we going to be better than the competition? Hopefully that builds on top of underserved needs. The next layer up is feature set or functionality that actually conveys those benefits to the customer. And then the top layer is the user experience that brings that functionality to life and is what the user actually interacts with. And when you have these layers here, basically, again, this is a way to capture the key hypotheses you need to get right. Then basically you're making hypotheses and decisions and executions in these top 3 layers. And the product market fit is just how well are those decisions and hypotheses you're making resonating with the market that you're trying to go after. And once I had this framework, I realized, this is just a set of hypotheses. I can create a process to guide you through working through those hypotheses. And I call that the lean product process. That's what I'm going to be walking through today and sharing some examples. So basically, for lean product process, we just start at the bottom of the pyramid and work our way up. We get clear on who's our target customer. We try to figure out what their underserved needs are. We identify our value prop. Which needs are we going to address? How are we going to be better? What's our feature set? That's where MVP comes in. We don't want to overscope and overbuild before we realize we're heading in the wrong direction or have enough evidence that we're going in the right direction. User experience. And by the way, I'm a big fan of actually validating before you actually code or build anything. And you'll see the example I share is using clickable prototypes. The prototyping tools have made it pretty easy these days to create high fidelity, high interactivity prototypes so that you can actually test things without building, right? But you can also, obviously if you have a prototype, great. If you have a live product, great. The last step that we add is we close the loop and we get out of the building and take our prototype or our live product and we test with those customers whose lives we were trying to make better in the first place. So those are the 6 steps of the lean product process. That's why the book is called a playbook. It walks you through step by step with a lot of advice and examples. And so that's what I'm going to be going through today. By the way, we have obviously a very a tight-knit group here, so anybody has any questions, definitely just raise your hand at any point in time. We can jump in if there's something related to what you're talking about. And that when you test, that's how you see where you're at. And this is meant to be, obviously there's some sequentiality to the hypotheses and how they get together. It's like a transitive property. Like if we get A right and B right and C right and D right and E right, then we will achieve a high enough level of product market fit. But it's meant to be iterative. And you may have heard of the build, measure, learn loop from Lean Startup. That's a great concept to get people realizing that this is meant to be iterative, right? You build something, you measure, you learn. But I have a modified version that I prefer because I don't think you should actually start by building something. I think there's a lot of stuff that you can learn before you write that expensive check to actually build something. So for me, it starts with hypothesize. You form hypotheses, right? You design a test, a way to test those hypotheses. You test your hypotheses, you learn from that test, and then you revise your hypotheses. So this is meant to be the iterative loop as we go through the lean product process. All right, so the first step is to determine your target customer. And by the way, I should mention that this process can be used on a new product, like a new V1 product or MVP. It can also be used if you're building like a new feature for a product. It can be used at the feature level. It doesn't have to be just the product level. You can also use it like on a V2 product or V3 product, or actually even any product where we haven't applied these techniques yet. You'll find ways to increase the amount of product market fit that you have. But if you are building a new product, I want to just acknowledge that we're starting with a blank sheet of paper and we've got to figure out, okay, who's my target customer? So I acknowledge there's a lot of uncertainty. It's probably the point of greatest uncertainty. We're forming our first hypothesis. It's okay to have some rough, high-level, tentative hypothesis because steps 1 and 2 are so intertwined that as we learn about 2, we're going to go back and revise our hypothesis on 1. But let me show you why it's the foundation and why it's so important. And what happens a lot in product definition that I find is basically people sometimes stay at the high level, the superficial level. And at first it sounds decent, sounds okay, sounds plausible, but then you realize that it's not detailed enough to really achieve product market fit. A couple months ago I was judging a competition and I went to the startup team and I said, who's your target customer? And they said to me, millennials. And my first response was, oh cool, they have a really specific answer, millennials. And then I took a step back and said, wait, millennials, there's like millions of millennials out there. And their product had to do with food preparation at home. I'm like, there must be some other way we can describe this customer to like narrow it down besides millennials, right? That happens all the time where you have an answer that sounds good, but it's like the outer layer of the onion. But when you actually take a specific target customer in mind, you start to realize that even if you're talking about some high-level need that multiple people have, the second you look through a particular customer's eyes, the details and the preferences are quite different. So let's take a need that a lot of us has, a need for transportation within 100 miles of our home, to get to work, to get to school, to get to the store, whatever it is, or to get to the gym, whatever it is, right? That's kind of like at that millennials level. We're staying at the high level. But the second we look through 2 different personas, we'll see that even though they share that high-level need, the details are quite different. Let's take 2 different personas. One, a soccer mom, and on the other hand, a speed demon, right? And imagine we did customer discovery interviews with 20 soccer moms. We said, hey, can you tell us what's important when it comes to transportation within 100 miles of your home? They might bring up things like, well, I'm carrying all my children and all their friends and all their athletic gear, so the car needs to be big enough to hold all that. I'm driving my children around. They're the most important thing in the world to me, so I want to make sure my car is safe. And I'm actually doing a lot of driving on the weekends to take them around, so fuel economy and how much I'm spending on gas is on my mind. Those might be some of the examples, right? They still have the high-level need, but that's their detailed needs or preferences. If we talk to 20 speed demons, they probably wouldn't bring up any of those things. They'd bring up things like, well, it's really important that the car goes fast, and it's really important that the car looks cool, and it's really important that I look cool when I'm driving down the street in the car, right? And you end up with very different products as a result to achieve product market fit, right? And that's why I like to bring up the car industry. Think of all, as you all got here today, think of all the different cars you see on the road, right? Scions, Suburbans, Coopers, Volvos. They've done a really good job of really understanding those micro segments and coming up with products that optimize product market fit for that segment. So that's why it's important to look through the customer lens, and everything should start with them. And in the book I mentioned that personas are a good way to capture your assumptions. Personas are usually used later in the UX design phase, but you can use them now, just some lightweight persona to capture your assumptions. And I also mentioned in the book a lot of people have had a bad experience with personas. I would just say like it probably wasn't the tool, it's probably whoever was using the tool. If the persona says, oh, they're a Capricorn and they like to, they like martinis, that doesn't really affect any decisions probably for your product development. So we just want to keep the core stuff in the persona. So if you have a bad experience, give them a second chance. All right, the second step is identifying underserved customer needs. Right, and so we've gotten clear on who we think our hypothetical customer is. Now we want to get clear on their customer needs. And an important concept that I discovered early in my career when you want to think clearly about customer needs is the concept of problem space versus solution space. Who's heard of problem space here before? Anybody? Oh, wow. No hands. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I can tell you about it. I hear more and more people talking about these days. So problem space is basically a customer problem, customer need, or customer benefit that the product should address. And sometimes people get wrapped up in the semantics of, is it a pain point, is it a need, is it a benefit? For me, it's all the same thing. They're all in the problem space, right? It's basically how are we going to try to create value for the customer. Let's say I had an idea. I said, I want to make it easy for people to share photos with their friends. That statement, share photos with your friends, is in the problem space. Okay? In contrast, solution space is a specific implementation designed to address that need or requirement. So if right after I said that, I said, oh, and by the way, I coded an app last weekend that makes it easy to share photos with your friends, that app would be in the solution space. Or if my friend was a designer and he said, hey, Dan, that sounds like a great idea. I created some mock-ups for you for your app. Those mock-ups will be in the solution space. So basically, solution is the specific implementation to address the need. Problem space is kind of like the abstract, disassociated need that hopefully the solution is meant to solve. And the main thing is I see many product teams, they just go barreling right into solution space. I mean, we live in the solution space, right? That's where we live. And it's super easy, for people just to start building stuff without getting clear on the problem space. So that's kind of the macro lesson there. The example I like to use to illustrate is basically when NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use here on Earth wouldn't work because they were relying on gravity. And it wasn't NASA. There's actually like an urban legend. If you Google this, you'll see, oh, NASA didn't do this. It wasn't NASA, but one of their contractors, Fisher, the head of the Fisher company, said, you know what? NASA didn't ask us to, but I think I can go and invent a pen that will write in space. And he spent $1 million in R&D, and he basically invented a space pen. Right? So I have one here. I haven't actually verified it works in space. If anyone works at NASA and wants to help me out, that would be cool. But yeah, it basically writes in space. It works. It gets the job done, right? Faced with the same challenge, the Russians gave their astronauts pencils. And you can actually get a Russian space pen. It's kind of a joke. It's a red pencil in a box where they're kind of poking fun. So why do I mention this example? I mention this example for a couple reasons. One, obviously, if these are both equally good solutions to the problem, then the one that didn't take $1 million and all that time and effort is better because it has a higher ROI. Right? That's one reason. The other lesson is, even when you're trying to stay on the problem space, it's really easy to pollute your problem space requirements with little artifacts, what I call solution pollution. Right? So when the head of Fisher said, hey, I think I can invent a pen that writes in space, he had some solution pollution in his problem space. What was that? Yeah.
That it had to be a pen.
It had to be a pen. He had a pen. A pen is a solution. Right? So he had already constrained the kind of set of solutions that could be there. It would have been better if he'd just been a little vague and said a way to write in space. That would have been better than saying a pen. Nice. So the other thing is basically the way we pollute things is basically we say things in our JIRA tickets like, oh, it needs to be, build a menu that does this, build a drop-down that does this, build a wizard that does this. So it's like, well, okay, well, we'll go build this drop-down, but like, why are we doing it? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And so what you can use is a technique, the 5 whys technique from the Toyota production system, where you say, well, why is that valuable? Why is that valuable? Why is that valuable? Why do we need to build a drop-down? Oh, because the user needs a way to specify their destination, when they're booking a flight or something. Okay, well, let's write it that way. Same thing back to this, well, I need a way to write in space. We can do 5 whys and say, why do astronauts need to write in space? Well, they need to write in space so they can take down information and refer to it later. That's an even better way to articulate that requirement, right? And then maybe you end up with some crazy Siri thing where you talk to it and it reads back to you. So by getting, staying clean on the problem space and getting clear on the problem you're trying to solve, you can basically open up for much more innovative solutions and not constrain your solutions. Let's talk about more of a software example. So I used to work at Intuit, and again, we have problem space on the left, solution space on the right, and you can map between the two. I used to work at Intuit on Quicken. One of our other big products is TurboTax. Anyone here use TurboTax this year? A few people? Okay. So it competes, it's a software product, so it's in the solution space. It competes with another software product, TaxCut, in the solution space. And what you want to do is have clear mapping between your problem space and solution space. For those of you guys that use TurboTax, why did you use it? What value did it provide for you?
Easy to use.
Easy to use?
Easy to use.
Easy to use. Anybody else use it?
Faster.
Faster. Thank you, sir. No? So we got faster, easy to use, right? So, and that's the thing about the problem space. It's messy. Like when I give this in a group and more people have used it, someone will say faster, someone will say cheaper, someone will say it's better than going to an accountant. Someone will say I can file at the last minute. People have a lot of different benefits. Different people have different benefits. And that's the thing about the problem space. It's messy. It's a lot easier to say, let's just go code something or build something. To try to really understand the problem space, it's messy. And it has layers. But if we had to say some overall umbrella statement, kind of like at the millennial level of what TurboTax does for people, we'd probably get something like it helps me prepare my taxes, helps me do my taxes, something like that. That would be the overall level. The other person to help me appreciate and under this concept was Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit. He's a very smart person, very innovative. And what he loved to do, if he had a group like this of product management people, he would say, who's the biggest competitor to TurboTax? And we would all raise our hands and hope he would pick us. And if he picked us, we'd be like, oh, it's TaxCut. He's like, no, you're wrong. It's pen and paper, because more Americans are doing their taxes with pen and paper. And that's the other thing, is by getting clear on the problem space for solution space, you basically understand what are the true set of competitors or substitutes for your product. Back to that market and product. Markets the needs don't change anywhere near as quickly as the products and solutions that come and go. And in the book, I talk about the need to listen to music on the go. right? It's a need that a lot of us have. Started out with FM transistor radios, then we went to Walkman, then we went to MP3 players, then we went to iPods, and now we just listen on our phone, right? So at least 5 ways of technology. I didn't even cover the Discman in there. But this need didn't change at all, right? The need to listen to music on the go didn't change. But so what you want to do is before you go jumping into solution space and defining your product and designing it basically and figuring out your features this is the fun part where you on your team get to like do divergent thinking and brainstorm what are all the different ways we can address this need. And this is where a cross-functional Agile team is awesome for this basically because everybody has great ideas. And what you want to do is come up with what are all the different ways we could address this need. And you're not saying we're not saying we're gonna do it right now, we're just brainstorming right now. So we could brainstorm a lot of different things, like maybe it could check our taxes. Computers are really good at math, right? It can prevent you from making a math mistake. It can file your taxes for you. Instead of having to print them out and go to the post office, you can just push a button. It can help you maximize your deductions. It can ask you questions about, hey, what did you do this year? Did you do any charitable deductions, things like that, to find ways to save you money. It can help you reduce your audit risk, right? It can actually analyze your return and say, oh, this looks a little risky, you may want to revisit this. Those are just 4 examples. But you'll notice that a well-written problem space, in my mind, statement starts out with like an action verb. It's actually like a well-written user story, right? It's like it does something for a user. Check my taxes, file, maximize, reduce. And it's written from the user's perspective, not the company's perspective or the product's perspective. My taxes, my deductions, my audit risk. So that's what you want to do as a team and brainstorm basically. And again, you want to peel the onion. I'd encourage you to try to peel the onion as much as you can and not stay at that superficial, millennials, transportation within 100 miles of my home thing. And when you do that, you'll realize, problem space is messy, but you'll start to see clusters of related benefits. So let's say we talk to a bunch of users, and these 3 benefits help me prepare my taxes, reduce my audit risk, and check my return. We did customer discovery interviews, and we did like the 5 whys. And so why is that valuable? Like a toddler. Why? Why is that valuable? What does that do for you? We might find out, what we're trying to do is get people to go from the specifics and go up to the more high level. We might find that overall the message is one of kind of empowerment or confidence. And the narrative might go, well, before TurboTax, I didn't really know much about the tax law. I'm not good with math. I don't know anything. I don't really know much about it. I'm always anxious and nervous. It's a very anxious and nervous time for me. I'm probably getting it wrong. They're probably going to come after me and put me in jail or give me a fine. But with TurboTax, they just ask me question after question, holds my hand. Next thing I know, I'm done. That might be kind of the overall benefit that we hear. There could be that's called the benefit ladder, because you're basically getting someone to come up high level. There could be a completely distinct benefit ladder about saving time, where we just literally take a stopwatch the old way and we take a stopwatch the new way. Save time preparing taxes. Like before TurboTax, when I did it by hand, it took me 3 days, but now it just takes me 8 hours, something like that. Save time filing as opposed to going to the post office. And there can be a completely third separate benefit ladder about saving money, right? So this is what I mean by a problem space definition. It doesn't have to be too detailed, but you've got kind of your core atomic benefits, and then like what are the ladders that we think they belong to. And you notice this whole time I've been talking about TurboTax, I haven't been talking about features. I've just been talking about problem space. It turns out that TurboTax has a feature mapped to each one of these. And when you've got that tight coupling between a solution and a problem, and you've got a well-named feature, you get a side benefit. Is just by seeing the name of one of these features, you can kind of figure out as a user how it's going to add value for your life, right? So that's what we want to do before we jump into solution space. Now, if you take my advice and you brainstorm like dozens of these potential benefits and problem statements that your team could address, the next question is, great, Dan, there's no way we could possibly address all these, so how do we decide which ones we should actually do? So we want to prioritize. And the framework that I created earlier in my career to prioritize is importance versus satisfaction. It's a way to kind of quantify the amount of customer value that you're going to be creating. So let me walk you through that. So the importance is how important is the user need from low to high on this axis. So if I took different needs and I ask you, hey, how important is it to share photos with your friends versus filing your taxes versus this, you'd have different answers. And you can think about it as a survey where I say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, please rate it. Or we could use it as a thinking tool among our team, like, hey, low, medium, high, what do we think? What's our hypothesis? So that's the importance of the user need. On the x-axis is how satisfied are people with the current alternatives today, how they're getting that need met today. Right? Again, you can think about it as a survey question where we get quantitative, or a thinking tool like low, medium, high. Let's divide it into 4 quadrants so we can talk about the different quadrants. In the bottom left quadrant, we have a low importance of user need, and we have low satisfaction with the current alternatives. In the bottom right, we have low importance of user need and high satisfaction with current alternatives. At the end of the day, neither of these are really worth going after, right, with your precious resources and time, because you're fundamentally addressing a low importance need. And people don't do this on purpose. It's just that they don't have a good sense of their customers and what's going to create value. They realize this after the fact, that what they thought was important, the customers didn't think was important. In the upper right quadrant, we have a high importance of user need, so that's better than having a low importance of user need. But we also have a high satisfaction with the current alternatives. This is basically the definition of a competitive market, right? Yeah, it's important, but people are pretty happy with what they have today, right? And what I think about here, first thing I think about is Google search. If I say, hey, how important is it to find the information you're looking for online? It's pretty important. But it's not like people walk around going, gosh, this Google search thing, it doesn't work, I can't find anything, right? You type in, you pretty much find it. Maybe you have to tweak your query once or twice, but you find what you're looking for, right? And that's basically the definition of competitive market. You hear people say you need to be 10x better. That's the quadrant where you definitely need to be 10x better. You can't just come in with a Me Too product or something that's just a little bit better, right? So I'm not saying you shouldn't enter that quadrant, but just be very clear on how you're going to be 10x better. And then the final quadrant, we have high importance of user need, so that's good. And we also have low satisfaction with current alternatives. That's great. That's where opportunities lie. And they won't be there forever, because there are other teams and companies, looking at the market and finding opportunities. But they will exist there for a while. If you really get clear on your customers, you can find some of those opportunities. And the space that I think about here is ride sharing. Lyft, Uber, all those people that provide provide ride sharing for people, like transportation. They've done a lot of things right to get where they're at, but I think they're fundamentally addressing an upper left quadrant need, especially in the Bay Area. The taxi cab scene was pretty bad. I remember living in the city, and you'd call a cab, and they'd be like, yep, it'll be there in 20, 30 minutes, and then 40 minutes later, no show. You're like, what? Call them back, what's going on, right? So you can imagine, though, how would this play out? Well, if we did a survey, and we said, I'll just do you guys. How important is it to get to your job interview on time, to your flight on time, right, to your date on time? Whatever it is, it's pretty important to get where you need to be on time most of the time. And, again, not everywhere, and there certainly are good taxi drivers out there, but you can imagine if we said, hey, Saz, think about your last 5 taxi rides, how satisfied were you with the experience? And we could break it down and say, how satisfied were you with how punctually the person arrived? How clean was the car? How polite was the driver? How safe did you feel when they were driving? How easy was it to pay the person at the end? You can imagine some low satisfaction scores. So that's an example of an upper left quadrant need. And what I like about this framework is it's meant to be a visual framework. So what I'm trying to say, to be really clear, is if there's a product represented by this red dot that's addressing a user need with that level of importance, and is addressing that need with that level of satisfaction, then by plotting it where those values are, the area of that rectangle that's formed is a proxy for how much customer value that product creates. And if there's another product that addresses a higher importance need with a higher level of satisfaction, then it just creates that much more value by having a larger area. And when you see that this way, you realize that the opportunity to create customer value from where the market is today is just how much area is there to the right of where the market is today. And that's why the upper left quadrant offers the biggest opportunity, because we have really high importance of user need, low satisfaction. There's a lot of area to the right that we could create user value with. And if you say the green product is your product, you can create customer value by just focusing on improving the satisfaction with which it addresses that user need. Now, if this kind of seems conceptual and theoretical, this importance and satisfaction information, let me show you some real data. So this is a product that I work on that had 13 key features. It had a large customer base. We are actually able to survey a lot of people and get statistically significant survey results. So this is kind of the more rigorous use of this method. And for each of the 13 key features, we ask people, hey, please rate the importance and please rate the satisfaction. So now we have importance and satisfaction. Instead of low, medium, high, we actually have numbers going up to 100. And each of these points is one of those 13 key features plotted where its importance and satisfaction were. And the number to the right is the satisfaction number, just so you can see it more easily. As the product manager for this product, the first thing I saw was this. I was like, great, this is great. People are telling us it's 100% importance, and we're getting 98% satisfaction. My second thought is, I don't want to waste any of my precious dev resources on this feature. Let's go find something that's going to add more value. Right? And we have a cloud of things here, and we have this feature down here. But this, for me, was the outlier in the upper left, where it was pretty high importance and pretty low satisfaction that offered the biggest opportunity to create customer value. And then a few years later, after I developed this framework, I was excited to come across the book What Customers Want by Anthony Ulwick. And he also has his own kind of quantitative approach for importance and satisfaction. So if this idea of getting rigorous about that appeals to you, then I would definitely recommend checking out his book. All right, so once we've gotten clear on our target customer, brainstormed in the problem space the needs that we can do, prioritize on which ones are the most underserved using important satisfaction, then we want to get clear on our value proposition. And again, our value proposition, okay, out of all the needs we talked about, which ones are we actually going to say our product does this, and how are we going to make sure we're better than the competition out there? And the framework I like to use to define your value proposition is the Kano Model. Is anyone familiar with the Kano Model? All right, I got a hand up, cool. So before I moved out to Silicon Valley, I studied lean manufacturing, and I learned about the Kano Model, and I think it's a great way to think about your product. So let me walk you through it real quick. It also talks about customer satisfaction, but let's start with this axis. This axis is, hey, how fully does the product meet the need? From not at all to the product fully meets the need. And then the y-axis is, as a result of how much the product meets the need, how much satisfaction does it create, or dissatisfaction does it create? Now, if this seems a little complicated, don't worry. The Kano Model makes it really simple. It boils everything down into one of 3 categories of features or benefits, and I'm going to walk you through them. The first is performance benefit or feature. This is pretty easy. The more the product meets the need, the more satisfaction it creates. The less it meets the need, the less satisfaction it creates. So more is better, less is worse. If we were building, say, microprocessors, and ours was 10% faster than the other guys, then chip speed is a performance benefit for microprocessors. So that would be a performance benefit, right? If we go back to cars, say I was shopping for a car, and I came across 2 cars, and they looked pretty similar, and the specs were pretty similar, but then all of a sudden I realized that one car had twice the fuel efficiency of the other one. All other things being equal, I'd pick that one because fuel economy is basically a performance benefit for cars. So that's performance benefit. The second category is must-haves. Now, having a must-have doesn't actually make anybody happy, right? Because they expect it to be there. They're unhappy if it's not there. And not having it makes them unhappy. And that's a must-have feature. It's not what your boss or the executive says is a must-have. It has to follow this kind of criteria. That if it's not there, people will not buy your product. People call this table stakes, or sometimes. Sticking with cars. Say I went, I was shopping for a new car. I went to the showroom. I really liked the way the car looked. And I read the little spec sheet on the window, and I really liked the specs and features that it had. But then I took a peek inside, and I realized it didn't have any seat belts. Right? I wouldn't buy it because I'd be afraid of getting hurt or dying. Right? So seat belts are a must-have for a car. But if car A has 5 seat belts and car B has 100 seat belts, I don't say car B is 20 times better than car A. Or once I have 1 seat belt per person, I'm flattened out, checked off. I'm not dissatisfied anymore. The third category is delighters. Not having a delighter doesn't cause any problems, but having a delighter can create a lot of positive value. Right? Not today, but the first cars that came out with GPS navigation, it was a delighter. Right? Before that, people were printing out Google Maps and MapQuest or getting lost. But then the first couple cars came out with GPS navigation. Just put in where you're going. You get from point A to point B in a whole new way. It's really easy. But as we know, over time, more and more cars got GPS navigation. People have their Garmin's and TomToms, and then now we all just navigate with our phones, right? So this isn't a static picture, it's dynamic, that the needs and features migrate over time, so that yesterday's delighters become today's performance features, become tomorrow's must-haves, and the pace with which that happens just depends on the level of competition and innovation in your space. But we basically want to use these 3 categories to think about, okay, for our product definition of these benefits, which ones are must-haves, which ones are performance, which ones are delighters. So we're going to do that with our value prop again, is get clear on which benefits are we providing and how are we going to be better. And so the way we put the Kano model to use is to create a grid where we list out, I've kept it generic on purpose so you can envision how it would apply to your space, a grid where we have 1 per row, each of the must-have benefits, each of the performance benefits, each of the delighter benefits. That's step 1 for our product category. Step 2 is to create column headings for each of our competitors and 1 for ourselves. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to score or rate your competitors. Right? And it doesn't have to be anything complicated. It can be low, medium, high. If there is some quantitative metric, like some chip speed or something like that, you can get quantitative. But here's an example of how we might of how this might get filled out. So competitor A has a must-have. They're the best at performance benefit 1. They're not so great at this performance benefit, and they're so here, and they have a delighter. Competitor B has the must-have. They're not so great here. They're the best at this one, and they're so here. Right? This is basically the competitive analysis. This is the backdrop upon which we want to be figuring out what's our value prop. This is the essence of product strategy. And I think that, honestly, less than 10% of product teams ever do an exercise like this to get really clear on how they're going to be better or different in what they're building. But against this backdrop, and by the way, this is one of my favorite definitions of strategies. It means saying no. It's super easy at this point, and I run workshops where people just go, high. We're going to beat everybody at everything, that doesn't really work out. You don't have the resources to do it. And even if you did, it would be not a clear positioning in the marketplace at all. So you have to kind of say no to something in order to get clear on what you're going to be the best at. So against that backdrop, here's what we might do. We might say, okay, of course we're going to have the must-have. We're going to deliver on performance benefit one somewhat, but we're not going to try to beat competitor A. We're going to say no to performance benefit 2, not worry about that one. And we're going to try to be the best at performance benefit 3, right? We're going to be better than the other competitors there. Maybe we've identified a market segment that really values that benefit. Maybe we have some technology ideas as far as how we can deliver higher levels of satisfaction for that benefit. And then we have our own delighter here, our own idea for a delighter, right? What matters the most is what's called your unique differentiators. In this grid, what matters the most is, okay, which performance benefit or benefits are we saying we're going to be the best at? And what's our unique delighter? That's what really matters the most. As we go into the next step of MVP, we want to make sure it conveys those aspects. Otherwise, we're just kind of testing must-haves and other stuff when we go and test our MVP. We want to know if our hypothesis is right that being the best in this category and delivering this delighter will really achieve product market fit. We want to test that in our MVP. So that leads right into the next step, which is your MVP feature set. Again, MVP is meant to prevent people from the old days of a big team of developers going off into a cave and coding for a long time and coming out and launching it and realizing nobody want what they just built. We want to base what they just built. We want to figure out what's the minimum we can build to get data and evidence to say, yeah, we're going in the right directions before we really invest a lot of resources. So that's an MVP. And even though it's designed for that, one of the top mistakes I see is people over-scoping. Again, it's really easy to say, yeah, throw that other thing in. Yeah, that one client's going to insist on it. Let's just put it in. It's a slippery slope, and you end up like with the kitchen sink. So it's easy to throw stuff in. The other mistake I see people make with an MVP, I like to explain with this diagram. And by the way, does anybody have, at your guys' place, do you guys have disagreements about MVPs? Anybody? Yeah? What's the main disagreements you have?
Oh, they think everything should be a DMVP.
Okay.
So I get them to say what's minimum viable versus what's minimum desirable.
Okay. Got it. Anybody else? What's the disagreements you guys have?
We have to say where to stop.
Where to stop? Yeah. Well,
I think the client said they need this.
Sure.
It's not really needed, but for MVP, but then because somebody said it.
Right. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it can be tough to. Again, it's like, we might take on some risk by not including X. But then the other thing is, that in the absence of any trade-off discussion, of course, why would I say no? When I run this exercise and we go through MVP, someone will be like, we really need this one feature. I'm like, oh, that's fine. We can have it. That's cool. It's just going to delay our launch by 3 months. Is that okay? And they're like, no. Hey, I don't need it, right? So I think the number one tool or technique is to make those trade-offs transparent and say, look, if you want to do this, it's going to take this long. You want to do this, it's going to take this long. Because if there's no trade-offs, people are going to go for the whole enchilada. They're going to be tempted to go for that. But the second mistake I see people make, aside from scope, I like to explain with this framework. So this is actually from Aaron Walters. He wrote a great book called Designing for Emotion. Did anyone here ever use MailChimp or familiar with it? So when it came out, I remember when it first came out, it was like the first mail program that actually had a really nice user experience. Actually, it was like kind of fun to use. It had a funny tone, good UI. So he created this framework in his book where he talks about, again, it's a pyramid, how functional the product is, how reliable the product is, how usable it is, and how delightful it is. And the idea is you color in. We know that like your V1 product or even your V2 product isn't going to like color in that whole pyramid and we're going to be like, yep, we're done. We nailed all the functionality. We nailed all the reliability. So this is kind of like a strategic way to say, okay, what are we going to bite off for our MVP? And another big mistake I see people make is they know they can't like bite off the whole pyramid with MVP. They know they can't even bite off all the functionality with MVP. They know that MVP has to be a subset of functionality. But they use MVP as an excuse to do this. Right? They build a subset of functionality. They say, you know what? It's okay if it's buggy. It's just going to be it's just an MVP, guys. It's okay if the UI is bad and people can't use it. It's just an MVP, right? Has anyone heard that from people? Yeah. How good do you think this tests with users when they see this, right? It's great that you have the functionality, but if it's buggy and they can't figure out how to use it or find it, it doesn't matter. Right? So these MVPs usually fall flat on their face, and then people go, oh my gosh, this whole MVP thing was just a mistake. We're going back to waterfall. Like, this is all wrong, right? So it's true that you want to build a subset of the pyramid, a slice, but you want to build a slice more like this. And I'm not saying it's going to be bug-free and like, wonderful UI, but for the subset of functionality you are building in MVP, let's make sure it's reliable enough and usable enough so that we get a true test of, hey, is this resonating with customers or not, right? So this is, again, an example where I see people misuse MVP. They only focus on the functionality to get it out. Now, once we get clear, and again, I don't have time to get into it, but and it's tough. That's probably one of the toughest things is deciding what really needs to go in the MVP. In the book, I cover some of that. We don't have time to get into that today, but it's about breaking features down into chunks and things like that. Once we get clear on, okay, great, we got clear on our target customer, what the underserved needs are, how we're going to be better or different, what's our feature set going to be. The next step is to work through our UX design and create a prototype. So we need to work through the UX design anyway for our product. But it also, as I said, can be very helpful to create a prototype that you can test with customers before you actually do any building. So this is where, for the first time, when we went to step 4, we went from problem space to solution space. And now we're basically going from words, right? If we're talking about what our features are, it's just in words. And now it's time to go from words to actual design, right? That's where UX design comes in. And the way I think about UX design is as an iceberg. And the reason why is, like an iceberg, there's a little bit above the surface that everybody sees and is obvious. But there's a lot more really going on beneath the surface that's not so obvious that most people don't see, right? The thing that everybody sees and reacts to is visual design. You're all looking at my slides now, the colors, the shapes, the fonts, right? We take in most of our information through our eyes, maybe a little bit through our ears when we're listening, but basically it's mainly through our eyes. But when you use a product that is really intuitive and easy to use, it's because the product team has done a good job with these other layers. And I don't have time to get into them in detail, but conceptual design is basically what's the fundamental concept for the design of the product. Information architecture, if it's hard to find things in the product, things aren't where you expect them to be, the labels don't make sense, they've done a poor job here. Conversely, if things are where you expect them to be, it's intuitive to find things, they've done a good job there. It's how you organize and structure your product and the information that it has. And then interaction design is literally how the customer interacts with the product, anything they can tap or click on, forms, controls, navigations, things like that, basically. So this is an important step. Does everyone here have dedicated designers? Yeah? Does anyone have issues with design?
Yeah, I have issues. So what can you use?
Only one person, that's great. That's awesome.
What can you use in place of that? Like, we develop APIs that are called by another product, so there's no...
I see. Yeah.
And so it's difficult to have some sort of user validation.
Great. The question was, hey, that's great, Dan, but we have APIs, so there's no real UX design for us. So what ends up happening for those products, a lot of times the documentation ends up being part of it, right? It's like, okay, how well are you kind of documenting so even before you write the API, you can write the documentation, say, here are the methods, here's what we're going to do, here's the data we expect to have out, and share that with people and get feedback on it before you code the API. So that's probably one of the closest things to a UI that you can do for that, basically, I would say. Yeah, and I guess to push the extension further, as far as bugs go, I guess if people are calling it the wrong way or something, you can have some kind of feedback loop there, right? That's like the equivalent of a bug or a misuse or something like that, where if you're not getting the 200 code back, you're getting some other code or some error. That would be other feedback that you might be able to get. So. And when we're going from words to our live final product, there's a range of things that we can do to work through the UX experience design. Like, we don't want to go straight from words to coding, and we don't want to go straight from words to high-fidelity mock-ups to coding. We want to work our way through there to kind of de-risk it and iterate. And the way I like to describe the set of artifacts or design deliverables you can create is to classify them based on their fidelity, from low to high, which is how closely does it resemble kind of pixel perfection, the final product that we're going to launch. And interactivity, how much compared to the final product can you actually tap, click, navigate, and do all the interactions with it. In the bottom left, we have the awesome hand sketch, right? Where paper or whiteboard, it's a great tool. It's the first thing you can do beyond words to get into sketching, but you can't click it and it's low fidelity, right? But it's a great tool for you and your team to iterate through and say, well, we could do it this way, we could do it that way, and iterate and get to the point where you're happy with it. And by the way, this is kind of like a preferred workflow that I like to use that I've seen a lot of teams use successfully. The next layer up, higher fidelity, higher interactivity, is clickable or tappable wireframes. So now we're putting the sketch in a digital tool like Balsamiq. Is anyone here use Balsamiq? You're familiar with it? So I think it's a great tool. It's really easy. It actually For the longest time, didn't even have straight lines to like really convey to you that like this is rough, this is early, right? There are other ways too, because that pyramid, the visual design iceberg, like the number of times I've taken a mock-up or wireframe into some stakeholder and they go, the first thing they say is, I don't like this red, right? It's like, oh my gosh, people so fixate on the tip of that iceberg that wireframes are deliberately grayscale, so we just avoid those silly debates until we agree, well, can we just agree what needs to be on the page before we trash the colors? Like if we were building a car, we wouldn't spend a lot of time up front going, gosh, should it be teal or should it be cherry red? We'd be talking about how many people does it need to hold, how fast does it need to go, things like that, right? So visual design is important, but you don't want to focus on it too early. So wireframes are a great tool to work through the information architecture, the interaction design. You on your team can iterate till you're happy with it. And then you can actually test with customers with wireframes, in my opinion. You know, one thing that makes that better is in the old days, people would put in like placeholder text like lorem ipsum just to throw it in there. These days, it's so easy. Just put the real text in because you'll work through. If it has real text and a semblance of what it looks like, then this is a great way to test with people because you'll find gross things like, okay, remember that tough MVP debate we had? Did that one feature really need to be in there? Say you managed to convince those guys and fend them off and say, all right, I got them to not put feature A in. Well, now you can test it, and maybe the test will go fine, or maybe the clients will be, are you crazy? There's no feature A, in there. So you can find missing functionality here. It lets you take a bigger risk on your MVP. You know what I mean? If you get in there, and then you can find out, oh gosh, people are saying they really need feature A, so now we can bite the bullet and actually build it. The next layer up is clickable mockups. So now mockups, they do have color, they do have visual design. A designer usually produces these in Slack or Illustrator or Photoshop, and they output, graphic files. The cool thing is, as a non-technical person, you can take those graphical files, non-designer, and upload them to InVision. Has anyone here used InVision? So it's great, right? You can take the output, and you can create little hotspot rectangles and say, okay, when they click here, it's going to go here. When they click here, it's going to go here. So you can string together a pretty good clickable prototype or tappable prototype that people can use. So that's a great way to test. And what you want to do is rinse and repeat there until you kind of work through any major issues and people start going, yeah, this seems pretty cool. I could see using this is going to create value. And then from there, you can go to live product pretty confidently. If you can do this before you do any coding, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and effort. And I'll share an example in a sec to close out of an example of doing that. Obviously, when you go to live product, you should test again. There's no browser compatibility issues here. There's no database performance issues here. So definitely, let's test the live product with customers. And sometimes, trade-offs have to get made during the dev process. Just to be crystal clear, this is what I mean by a wireframe. No color, no images, right? You can't tell me you don't like the red because there's no red. This is Balsamic, by the way, with all their standard iOS widgets. This is a wireframe for the same exact screen. A mock-up. So now we've got colors, images, fonts, things like that. Right? That's the difference. And my big advice is work through this before you don't start here. Work through this first. All right. Last step of the process is we've got our shiny prototype or our live product. It's time to get out of the building, test with customers. Now step 6, where we're closing the loop, basically. All right. I want to close out. I don't have time to get into it, but there's a lot of advice on how to run those sessions well and how to ask. It really comes down to how you ask the questions and how not to ask the questions. But I want to close out in the last minutes we have with a case study of this applied end-to-end for a product called marketingreport.com. And it was a consulting client of mine, a CEO of a startup. They already had a product in market, but he had an idea for a second new product, and he wanted to explore it. The team was small. It was me, him, the VP of marketing, and a designer. And he had a really small dev team, so he said, hey, we need to do as much as we can on validating this without coding. So I was excited by that. And he just wanted to see if there was a business opportunity there. Now, the idea, does anyone here get junk mail? Yeah, right? So direct mail is a nice euphemism for junk mail. It's a nice way to say it. But basically the idea is like, say I come home today from the conference, and there's a coupon for cat litter for Dan Olsen that I get in my mailbox. Why did I get that coupon? Well, it's because in some marketing database in the cloud somewhere, it says Dan Olsen has a cat, right? And I may or may not have a cat, right? So the idea was to kind of give people transparency and control into why they're getting the junk mail they're getting. It's probably best explained by analogy, a credit report. If you think about credit reports and applying for credit, today it's pretty transparent, right? You have credit scores, you have credit reports, you can see what's going on. If somebody says you didn't pay a bill that you did, you can go get it fixed. But imagine, 20 years ago or so, in the dark ages, you'd apply for a loan or a credit card, you put in your social security number, it'd go off into the ether, and it'd come back yes or no, and you wouldn't know why, right? That was the idea, is for junk mail to give you transparency and control. So I said, okay, sounds great. By the way, the target market, you guys all said yes, you get junk mail. It's a broad B2C consumer offering. That's our target market. Step 2 is let's get clear on the customer benefits and the problem space. The team basically, this was the problem space statement. Learn why I received the junk mail I received. That was their articulation of the problem. And then these were the top solution space ideas. A marketing report, which was like a credit report, which would have all the data and show you, oh, it says Dan Olsen has a cat, things like that. He's married, he lives here, so, right? And then a marketing score, which was meant to be like a credit score, some numerical measure. That was the core that everybody agreed on, this problem and these MVP features. One of the executives actually also said, well, you know, what about money-saving offers? What if I say, you know what, I don't have a cat, but I have a dog. Can I raise my hand and tell you I have a dog, so you start sending me dog food coupons that I would find valuable? So that was that. He thought, he had a hypothesis, hey, maybe people want to compare their spending habits and patterns with other people. So we had that, compare yourself to others. And finally, social networking was hot at the time, so we just slapped in, bolted on social networking. Pure solution space, hippo, you know, finger in the pie thing, right? The other executive had no interest in that. He cared about the green the most. And he said, well, what if we just explore overall just reducing people's junk mail? And since we're saving paper, maybe we can make some kind of save trees, environmental benefit thing. So I iterated this with them to the point. I said, okay, is everyone's idea on here? They said yes. Now I was like, great. We got clear on our problem space, our MVP features. I looked at this. I said, this is way too big for one MVP. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that core green and combine it with the yellow and make that one MVP. And we made one set of prototypes for that. We called it Marketing Shield because it was shielding you from junk mail. And we took the core green idea plus the blue stuff and called it Marketing Saver. So we actually had 2 MVPs and 2 sets of prototypes that we tested because there was so much functionality here, right? This is an example of what we showed. I'd call it medium fidelity. Marketingreport.com, you know, had some messaging. We didn't worry too much about making it look pretty and making it look really nice. When you clicked in, here's what you saw. We had these little modules, and that's how we didn't have to do 2 completely different UI designs. We just kind of mix and match the modules. So the Saver had the Saver modules, and then when you clicked more, it would go to a page that was all about that feature. That's where the feature lives. So it was a site of about 8 or 9 pages or features. What did we learn? So I moderated it through user tests. What did we learn? Here's that same diagram, now color-coded with red, yellow, green. I should say during this test, like, there were tons of complaints and questions and comments. Like, people were not really excited about it. So green doesn't mean like, yeah, they're ready to buy it, it was all good. Green means, well, we think we have a good handle on the questions and concerns, and we think that behind there's some real opportunity to create customer value if we address those concerns. So the first thing is, you know, I was glad that we had some green. There's no guarantee you're going to have any green. So we had some green here, and we had some green here, right? The next thing is, what was the core thing we were testing? It was this stuff. Did we have any green in the core idea? No. It's like, thank God we tested something else. And this happens all the time. Just by getting out in front of customers with an idea, you know, you hear from them, nah, that's not too exciting, but you learn about some adjacent idea or they tell you something else, right? Slack didn't start out as a chat platform, right? Flickr didn't start out as a photo platform, right? So they got out in market and they got a pull from the market that took them where they went, basically, right? So no green, so I'm glad we tested some other stuff. Finally, the red. Right? The red means they did not like it. We do not need to waste resources, right? That's the unimportant stuff, right? Do you guys know what a marketing score is? I don't know what a marketing score is, but I know it would have taken a lot of money to sign some third-party data licensing deal to get the data. It would have taken a lot of engineering time and money to develop some algorithm, but because people don't get it, we just cut it out, right? Now again, the cool thing is we didn't do a single line of coding. This was all InVision prototypes. So we had 0 qualms about just tossing them out the window and starting with a blank sheet of paper. And what we did is we took the 6 pages of notes that we learned from the shield sessions, right? And I should say, you know, you hear about a pivot. We were here, we had to decide we're going to pivot here, we're going to pivot here. We pivoted here, basically, because for a few reasons, but that's why we pivoted. We pivoted there, and we started from scratch with a new prototype, and it was called Junk Mail Freeze, basically, right? And we just made sure that the new prototype addressed all the questions and concerns that we heard. And we learned a lot of stuff. And so what, peeling the onion, right? We said, hey, we're going to reduce junk mail. Well, we learned that not all junk mail is the same. Some junk mail is really, really more annoying for most people. It's the financial junk mail, cash advance checks, pre-approved credit card offers. Those are really annoying to people because they're afraid someone's going to defraud their account or do identity theft, right? So once we learned that, we put that front and center. Second time around, people like hone in on that, and you can see their temples start to, like, veins start to go because they're getting angry just thinking about it, right? I learned all kinds of stuff. I learned, like, hey, tell me, before we jumped in the prototype, I'm like, hey, can you tell me what you do with your junk mail? Like, Dan, let me tell you. I come to my mailbox, and I go grab my stack of mail, and I go to my paper shredder, and I go shred, 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 shred for 5 minutes. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's 30 minutes a week That's 1,500 minutes a year. So we had a whole save time benefit that we don't even have in our problem space. There's no save time anywhere. Remember the benefit ladder? So we put that in here. Spend less time shredding mail. Silly things. People said, oh, you're going to save trees? How many trees are you going to save? So we put in 43 trees right there so they would know. I mean, just, and we still got some questions and comments, but they were a lot fewer and a lot smaller. And both times I asked people, hey, would you pay $10 a month for the service? And it's always iffy to ask people if they would pay, if they don't have to pay. First time around, no one was going for it. Second time around, what they said is, well, I need a 30-day trial. But if your product does what it says and these prototypes, I would gladly pay. And then the cool thing was, after the test was done, I'm like, thank you so much for your time. Here's your check for $100 for taking the time to talk to us today. Almost every single person the second time around was like, so is this product live now? Can I go use it? They're like, no, it's just a prototype. We're working on it. They're like, can I give you my email? Can you email me when it's live? So that was a completely night and day performance difference between the first two. So I was pretty psyched about that. All right, to sum up, the lean product process, again, get clear on your target customer, identify the underserved needs with importance and satisfaction. Value prop is where the Kano model comes in to figure out how you're going to be better than the competition. We don't want to overbuild, so we identify our MVP, use UX design and wireframes to work through the prototype, get out of the building and test with customers, and iterate through that loop that we talked about, hypothesize, design, test, learn, with the goal of improving product market fit. A couple last things. I mentioned that I run a monthly speaker series. The next one is actually Thursday with Heaton Shaw. He was the founder of Kiss Metrics and Crazy Egg. You can go to meetup.com/lean-product. He's going to be talking about 7 habits for successful product prioritization. He's spoken there before. He's a very smart guy. It should be a really good talk. And then the other thing I just want to let people know in cases of interest is I do, every once in a while, do public workshops. So I'm doing one in San Francisco on November 30th. I have a special discount code for the AgileCamp event. It's 15% if anybody's interested. We basically go all depth. Unfortunately, this talk, we didn't have time to do exercises. We don't have enough time, but usually in that, all day, we basically go through and we do group exercises to bring all the concepts to life. We also get into analytics, user testing, a lot of things we didn't get time to get into today. So with that, again, here's my info. Happy to answer any questions that we didn't get a chance to get to yet. Thanks.